To the seminar of this semester. Let's start by acknowledging that we are gathering on a land that has as traditional and true owners the Gadigal people of the Ora Nation. Today we have quite a unique speaker. He's not coming from engineering or economics, but actually from the humanities. He's a historian, so we are going to learn today about ancient history of transport, particularly from Rome. So we have Professor Ray Laurence from Macquarie University. He's an expert on ancient mobility and ancient Rome. He was previously in the University of Kent in Britain, and he came to Australia around a decade ago to start studying here as well. So without further ado, thank you very much for coming with us today, Ray, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I have never given a talk to engineers before, so I'm feeling quite worried because I'm not sure what you guys are going to be interested in. But I thought I'd give a bit of an overview. There'll be pictures rather than words because pictures are easier. But to show you how some things were made in the Roman world and how animal power could sort of make an empire work. And also just to see, well, how difficult is it to build roads? How difficult is that? We can think about that. Let's see if we can get this. Oh, yes, it does. So you can go to Macquarie Place. Most people haven't ever seen this. People who are born in Sydney don't know this is here. So in Macquarie Place, there is an obelisk from which all the roads were measured in 1818. So the idea is you have this central point and you measure from it. It's exactly the same as in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, there was a golden milestone in Rome where every road in Italy was measured from it. So after 1 mile, you have a milestone saying 1, 2, and it goes all the way to 300 or more. So, and this, if you look at it, how many roads did they have in 1818? Well, they had 137 miles to Bathurst, and then they had, we can go to Windsor, we can go to Parramatta, Liverpool, and then that's about it. So total road system, the settlers had been here for 30 years, and that's the limit they built. So, and the roads themselves, they sent some poor British guy who was a part of the Royal Engineers to Australia in the 1860 to review the problem of roads. He went home after 2 years because everyone complained at him. But he did manage to introduce the telegraph, which connected Australia for the first time to India. So having the telegraph was kind of the big innovation he built. He had a train crash. They had 15 kilometers of train line in 1860. So if we're thinking in terms of how quickly colonies can build roads, we actually see in New South Wales it's extremely slow. And then during the gold rush, they have to somehow get 10,000 people to the snowy mountains, to the gold fields. And they have people arriving, they produce maps, which are in multiple languages. There's a Chinese version, for example. And at that point, 2 years before, most people did not know how to get there. So there were routes which they said, it's extremely difficult, there are no bridges, there is really no infrastructure. So suddenly you're moving 10,000 people to somewhere with no infrastructure. So New South Wales has quite an interesting history of roads if you want to go into it. Now, the thing we're always told in humanities is we must go and talk to engineers and scientists because the big thing is called consilience. In somehow, we're going to work together. Well, I met these two guys at lunchtime, and I think we worked out when we looked at my map, they were speechless. We can have a look at my map in a bit later. You'll see some of it. Now, the things which get exciting for engineers, of course, are stuff which is built. Stuff which is built quite often. So you see this guy here. This is roughly 220 before Christ. So it's the Via Flaminia. And the problem they have is there is a great big cliff here, and there is a river to be crossed down here. So they build this viaduct. You can see the angle of it. You can think about gradient immediately. It's very graphic. And if you think the Roman world doesn't really have brakes, just to be clear, that sort of brakes are not really a thing which we know they had. We have evidence of carts, but we have no evidence of brakes. So we have surviving. There were a lot more. This is a Roman bridge in Rimini. There are probably the best place to go for bridges in the whole Roman world would be Spain. And the reason is quite simple, that Spain didn't have the Second World War. In Italy, there were hundreds of bridges until 1944, when most of them were blown up. This bridge was in use. It's now I think it's a pedestrian bridge now, but they've been used for centuries. So building stuff which lasts for centuries is kind of impressive. And we can also look at the road surface, and we see this kind of interlocking pattern. And this is typical of around Rome and central Italy. It's built out of lava, basically. Sometimes it's called basalt, and we're quite interested in like which volcano did it come out of, and we'll have a look at that in a while. So there's some field work comes in, and if you wanted a map of all the Roman roads in Europe, and this should actually go a bit further this way. This is the latest incarnation. There's an interactive thing, so you can try and plot. You're allowed to, you can ask this, how long does it get from here to over here at certain different seasons of the year? So if you're, it's quite a cool thing. It's called itiner-e.org. It's something you might really like playing around with, just in terms of, well, what happens if we go in winter rather than summer? How much does it cost? They've got various, there are a few problems with it, which we don't like, because if you look here, there's suddenly, there aren't enough roads. We know there are far more roads than that. So they haven't plotted everything. They've plotted stuff from other people's data, and some of the data is quite old, but it's the best map around. So itiner.e.org, it was featured in, I think it was featured in Nature last year. So it was a big splash, the guys from Aarhus. And we can probably, and as you can see, the roads go into the desert, they go up the Nile. And if we're thinking, we also go across the Alps, so snowbound roads. And so how do you find your way when it's snowing? It's something we can talk about at the end. And this is kind of one of my favorite places. We did quite a lot of field work here, looking at individual paving stones. It gets that exciting, guys. So we've got a nice map. So there is a plan behind this, believe it or not. So we're going to talk about motive power, like what moves stuff. So the fundamentals of moving stuff. And we're going to talk about donkeys, mules, which are a cross between a donkey and a horse, which produces a bigger animal, a better animal. And we're going to talk about camels, a bit about domestication. We'll have a look at bridges and roads, and then we'll think about travel technology. How do you estimate how long it will get from A to B? How do you send a letter to somebody when they are moving? Sort of basic fundamental mobility stuff. Now, where I come from, before many people in this room were born, I wrote this book because I'm quite old. And I also work on cities, which means I also worked on the internal arrangement of streets in Pompeii. That was my PhD thesis a long time ago. There is a book, we finished volume 1, The Cultural History of Transport and Mobility. And we finished 2 years ago, but someone's not finished, so the 6-volume set can't come out until they finish. So that will be coming. Now, the other thing which is going on in the world is the whole DNA thing about animals. Now, this is actually huge projects about camels, donkeys, mules. And one of the things which the genome guys look at is they're sort of looking at how do you overcome obstacles, which is actually sort of the stuff you do as I understand it. I had a look at the talks, I've looked at the posters next to his office, and I think you're actually sort of doing not such different things to what some of the thinking behind this. And this is where sort of we're doing history of mobility and how mobility changes through time. You're projecting into the future and hoping to change mobility, making things better for the rest of the world. But we tend to go back, well, how do you do that? How does it work? And so domestication, there's a few things to know, just date-wise. Donkeys are domesticated about 5000 BCE. So they are the motive force of antiquity. We find that they spread through Eurasia by the 3rd millennium. So we're actually sort of in deep time still. And then we find that we start seeing divisions in the genome types. And we would say that probably in southern France, the donkey turns up probably roughly sort of 50s BCE. So Julius Caesar brings donkeys with him, brings mules with him, and that's the first time we see donkeys and mules in France. So that sort of movement westwards is something which is quite intriguing. We're trying to sort of plot it out, and you'll see some of the attempts to plot that out. And if today there are more donkeys in the world, the donkey population of the world is increasing because they're massively cheap. They eat rubbish largely, and the power of them is quite high compared with horses. Horses are not great at carrying stuff, basically. So one of the things you can do is you can herd donkeys, you can have child herding donkeys. These are, if we're thinking of how the ancient world was built, it's this animal, mainly. The other thing, just to think, this is a graph which is about production worldwide of tons of lead. So it gives us, and I show it, it's not accurate, but it shows roughly what happens in the ancient world. So the Roman world is here. Industrial Revolution is here. The amount of metal they were producing was absolutely enormous. So there's Rome producing this, but there's also Han China, and all of this stuff goes up into the Greenland ice cap, where people have taken cores through the Greenland ice cap, and with radiocarbon dating, we've got quite good dating for that sequence. So if we're thinking there is a massive difference between, this would be, we're in sort of, Athens is here, so Greece, greatness of Greece, democracy, etc., and this is Rome. So one of the things which we should expect in that change, and the graph shows a change over time, it's illustrative, and then we have a dip where everything goes badly wrong. At the end of the Roman period, there's also climate change, plague, etc. So, but what we can think about, if we're going to have a change of the amount of metal people are using, we should also have a change in mobility. So, which is kind of where we sit. At this point, we're worried about data, and you can, copper pollution, atmospheric copper pollution, again out of the Greenland ice cap, we can see, fairly go, 1 BCE, 2,300 metric tons, and if we're looking down to 1750, the Industrial Revolution is not getting close. So this is something which is quite remarkable about the Roman period. It's totally different from everywhere else. Also, we can look at shipwrecks. So shipwreck data, so this is BC, AD, Roman period. There are more shipwrecks in the Mediterranean than any other period. So a lot of movement of goods is happening. So that idea of movement, the idea of using more things. Now, the westward movement of the donkey may coincide with city building. So we might think that places like the rebuilding of Athens, which starts in about 800 BCE, may coincide with the gradual shift of donkeys westwards. Now, the thing about a mule is a big donkey, basically. It's a cross between a male donkey and a female horse, and the beauty of them is that they cannot reproduce. They're completely sterile. Now, these become the most prestigious animals for transport in the Roman world. Now, the thing about them is their legs are stronger than horses, and also they have the capacity to move like donkeys rather than horses. So a fundamental engineering thing, and which gives them a capacity to be more useful. Now, if you've seen, has anybody seen the film The Odyssey? Anybody? One person? Did you like it? Yep. Okay. So, and if you go and read Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, you will discover there are lots of mules in there. They are mentioned constantly. It's one of those intriguing things. When King Priam gets the body of Hector back from Achilles, he sends a cart full of treasure pulled by mules. Now, epic poetry having mules in it, it's a story, the film's a story, but this gives us a density. So we can actually go, in the Greek world, by 800 BCE, they have mules for sure. This has become an animal which is going to be mentioned time and time again in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So that animal becomes, so we can have a reference point going, well, that animal's definitely there. So when did the mule get to Italy? Is because I tend to focus on Italy, I want to know the answer, and the answer is one of those puzzles. We can also have Hesiod's works and days, that the fields are worked by oxen and mules. So two different types of animal. But we also find in the Olympic Games, for a very short period of time, that mule racing is a thing. Now, this is something which, why did they start mule racing and why did they stop mule racing? Why did they think it was interesting and then thought, we're not doing that anymore? It's kind of those big questions which you go, puzzle historians because you don't know the answer. Extremely annoying. But the guys who win them are often from Sicily. So we have this in the 5th century BCE. So we know mules have reached Sicily in the 5th century BCE. So we're starting to see the gradual movement westwards. And this is the thing. The races for mule carts and the trotting race were instituted respectively at the 70th Olympiad, the 70th Olympic Games, and the 71st, but were both abolished by proclamation by the 64th. Naturally, the problem we have is they don't say why. And this is what's so frustrating being somebody who works on 2,000 years ago, because it's not written down somewhere. Talking to people who work outside ancient history, you guys, scientists, people that go, well, surely that's written down. And I go, well, surely it isn't, because not everything survives. So the survival of this Greek text depends on medieval monks copying it out. They don't copy out everything, and they copy out and eventually ends up on paper, invented in the 1200s. But paper, as you know, doesn't survive well. You have to make copies of it. Luckily, when the printing press turned up, after printing the Bible, they started printing Latin and Greek ancient sources. So that was their priority. We don't know why that is. And one of the guys who, you can see him here, you can see his mule. He also puts a hare on the back because he introduces hares into Sicily. He's somebody famous for moving animals. So this movement of animals is moving westwards, and there is great stuff on the genome of Sardinian pigs. As the guy who wrote the paper said, pigs cannot swim, so how do they get to Sardinia? And they become a particular nature and interesting. Right, so by the time we get to the 1st century AD, we have clear evidence of mule breeding in Italy. So we start getting specialized mule breeding, and we say, well, of course, we breed horses for the circus. Everybody's seen Ben-Hur probably, Romans, chariot racing, etc. And then there is the stock used for breeding mules, which is also really expensive. So, and this guy, Varro, he actually has a mule farm, and he also talks about the price. Now, this price, 400,000 sesterces, is probably a third of a very rich man's estate. Hugely expensive. So breeding deliberately. And at the same time, of course, if we're thinking about movement of people, the Romans are conquering everywhere, enslaving people, and moving humans to Italy at the same time. So in terms of migration of animals, use of new animals. Now, here's a question. The pyramid comes from 2500 BCE. Was the camel domesticated before or after the building of the pyramid? Anybody want to guess? Before? Nope. After. The camel is domesticated about 1200 BC. So imagine a world of Egypt without camels. You just like, it's kind of unimaginable when you suddenly go, that can't be right. Because we always see pictures of pyramid, camel in front of it, taken by my colleague Julia Hamilton. But this guy, I spent a study tour with Jacopo. He's now died, unfortunately, but we had enormous fun in Japan because we had to give lectures at universities, but we also had quite a lot of dead time. But he's the guy who worked out quite clearly that in Europe, up to 1500 AD, there were camels. And then they disappeared. Nobody knows why they disappear. And we have clear evidence they're domesticated 1200 BCE, 500 BCE, they proliferate in Egypt in particular. And then from about 60 AD, they are being imported into Italy. So this sort of wanting more sort of motive power for transport is something we have. This is from Herculaneum. It sort of looks like a camel. There's no hump, but it's fairly camel-like. And this inscription is to the dead person who was somebody who was a trader in camels. So we have sort of fairly clear evidence that they want to have more motive power. Now, the question is, why do you do this? Obviously, in Australia, Australia is famous for importing camels, and the population of camels in the wild in Australia is bigger than anywhere in the world today. So if you're just thinking of now calculating loads of these things, there are different figures by different historians. So we're just going to accept this one, okay? So roughly, the dromedary, the one-hump camel, can carry far more than a donkey, far more than a mule. So they are actually sort of, it's the efficiency of them. And there is the double-humped camel is something the Romans start doing, is crossing these two together and making a hybrid. And the hybrid is huge. If you go on YouTube and watch camel wrestling, I recommend this. If you want something to do tonight, if you're bored or you're doing an assessment and a bit bored, just go on YouTube and have a look at camel wrestling because it is incredible. It's just like one of those sports you've never heard of. But this gives you a sense of the power of these animals. They're amazingly strong. And we have in the Roman period, if we're thinking 500 BCE here, and the guys with the genomes can see that by the end of the Roman period, all of North Africa has camels, just as we associate the camel with North Africa today. What the genome people didn't do was to have a look at any of the camel bones from Europe. So this is something which we're thinking, okay, so how did the Roman world make the mobility of the modern world? This is one of the aspects. Now, I wanted to show you this because this bridge is, there used to be more of it. We like things which fall down in archaeology. It fell down in 1850. It's built in about 27 BCE. But the point of it is to create a level surface, as level a surface as possible. People often think Roman roads are straight, but if you're going over the Apennines, they're not straight. So they can be straight in flatland, but not. So using contours. And the other thing, Roman roads are never down in the valley because they flood. So the point of them is to create an all-weather surface. And this viaduct, you can see a big drain here. One of the things it does is create a flat surface. We've got a guy, that's Thomas Ashby from about 1912. So I've been there, but it's now completely overgrown again. So one of the things, we can see these things sometimes, and we don't always see them. This is more the classic image of a Roman road, dead straight. And you can pick out, again, lava paving, but every so often you see white limestone. They don't have tons of this stuff. And we also find in the regions which are away from the volcanoes, we have white limestone. And we know from ancient writers that they prefer the really hard black stone rather than the white stone. And we can see this in just for a pointer. So if you see here, this is the Via Appia. Somebody's cycled down it, I heard today. So it's right on a lava flow. And that lava flow up here is this quarry where we can start looking at the actual material. Now, one of the things the Romans say about, we have some Latin, sorry, I didn't translate it, but one of the inscriptions, this is a 2nd century AD inscription about restoring a road. And the first bit, this is all the emperor's name to start off with, and all his offices. Eventually down here, we have the road, which was before in useless white stone and corrupted. So corrupted means it's fallen apart. They've made it better with new silex, the dark stone. They replaced, they're conscious this white stone isn't good enough. And we can find other examples of from so-and-so. This one changes from gravel to paving in that dark stone again. That's silex, is that basic Latin word for dark stone. So we also find that there's a vocabulary around repairing roads, which if you're a historian who likes these things, you tend to be a bit obsessed by that sort of thing. And this one is the one idea where we get a division of pricing. Who pays for it? We only have 3 inscriptions from the whole of the Roman world which actually tell us about pricing of the road, and it's the same place. So 15 3/4 miles. Roman mile is roughly the same as a British mile, roughly 1.5 kilometers to a mile. Cost 1,470,000 sesterces. That's equivalent of more than a really wealthy person's landholding. And the emperor pays 1.4 million, and then roughly 569,000 is paid by the landholders. So if you like, it's an emperor plus landowner partnership where the emperor pays more. Now, the roads are a state thing. They're owned by the state. They are one of the very, very few things which are owned by the state. The Roman state is a pretty non-interventionist place, and it tries to not do things. They gave up taxing Roman citizens in 167 BCE when they brought loads of booty back and thought, we've got so much money, we don't need to do it. They have controversial things about inheritance tax. Inheritance tax at 3% is controversial in the Roman world. So a no-tax economy almost. So now the reason this may be so expensive is because inscriptions this shape tend to be bridges. They tend to be on bridges, whereas milestones tend to be round. We'll see some of them later. So one of the things, if you're actually looking at this cost, it's the cost of renewing the road. And we hear a lot about washed away bridges, things not going right. Now, the actual stone, and this is where you can get very nerdy and detailed about this. So we got 2 different ones. This one, you can show that sort of there is different material. This one's got more crystals in it. Lava flows vary from top to bottom, vary the number of crystals in them. But what we see is this if you pulled that out, it's like a nail which holds the stone in. So it's banged in. So they get this very close fitting stones. And then you've got these basic things which fasten it together. Now, typically what happens after Rome is the paving disintegrates. Bits start falling off, it becomes a nuisance, and you find somebody decides to remove the paving and make a field wall out of it. So quite often you find the paving stones in the field wall. Because underneath it is a series of compacted material about that deep. So in terms of over-engineering, this is total madness. Right? You would say, if you are going to actually have that many layers, and some of it builds up, some of it's renewed, but ultimately, you'll find that there's a depth to the material. So this means when you drive in Italy, you might be driving, you can drive down the Via Appia, somebody's been on a bicycle on the first bit, but until the autostrada was invented in Italy, which was in the 1930s, nearly all of the roads of Italy followed the lines of the ancient roads. So the Via Flaminia, today you can take the Via Flaminia Nova, the new Via Flaminia, rather than the old road. So these things were engineered to the point where they simply survive into modern Europe. Now, in Britain, they weren't paving roads, they had compacted gravel. So when I left school and decided I wanted to go and dig lots of things up as an archaeologist, working as a laborer, basically. Well, the first place I went to where we found a medieval pond, we were meant to be finding a Roman road. I said to the person, the director of the site, saying, how do you know you've got a Roman road when you are digging with a pickaxe? And the person said, you'll hit it with a pickaxe and the pickaxe will fly out your hands because it's that solid. It's compacted to the point where you can't actually get any erosion into it with 18-year-old pickaxe. Doesn't work. So again, there we actually have long-term road building. And if you go to Britain, you'll hear there's a street called Watling Street, Ermine Street, and a lot of those routes are actually Roman roads. So if we're thinking about continuity, and if we go and think about the capitals of Europe, which capitals of Europe were founded by the Romans? We can think of London, we can think of Paris, weren't cities before the Romans. So they become the transport hubs of the Roman Empire, but they're the transport hubs of the modern nation state as well. So one of the things we wanted to do, we got a portable X-ray fluorescence thing, and we decided to create a very painful situation for ourselves where you have to hold this thing. It weighs not that much, but you have to hold it on the stone for 90 seconds and then do that again and do that again for the whole day. And as you can see, that's me when I was younger. And it's also hot, so you have to keep the machine cool. And we wanted to find out more about the geochemistry of the material, but without smashing it up, because archaeologists don't do that, because we don't want to break things, we want to preserve them, we'd never get a permit to smash them. So this was moderately successful because it showed we've got lava flows here of volcanoes, volcanic lakes north of Rome, that it's coming from there, there, or there. Now the problem is you can't distinguish them from each other. But what if, for the first time it said, it's not coming from here, it's not being shipped over to the river, which somebody thought was a good idea. It's actually quite localized. It could possibly be shipped up from the river from here, maybe. But the amount of material which is used in Rome, if you think every single street in Rome was paved, there is an enormous amount of quarrying going on and a lot of movement of that material. And this material is the densest possible. This is that quarry. It shows you how this splits. So this is how you get some of those patterns in the actual paving stone. And if we're thinking of the types of material, this is a graph showing the porosity of lava in similar lava flows, but you get a variation from something like that with lots of crystals and something like that. And one of the things we noticed by putting the machine on it is you have to put the machine on the bit which is sort of nice and grey. Now finding the bit which is nice and grey, about that big, became incredibly difficult in some places. And in those places, we started seeing wheel ruts in the stone. They were wearing away. A lot of people do calculations of using this stuff, which is a modern basalt, inverted commas, modern lava, but that's actually much denser than the rocks they were using. And in Pompeii, you have the complete mess of Pompeian streets because they use very local stone. It's very friable, it's full of crystals, and it creates wheel ruts. To the point where they, and my colleague Eric Poehler at MIT did some work on this, he started noting little splashes of metal, like little tiny splashes of rusted iron on the paving stones. And he started noticing these at the bottom of some of the wheel ruts. And his theory is that they were using molten iron to see if they could fix the wheel ruts rather than quarrying new stone. So it's a very, very strange uses. And this is the whole language which is created of a road which is not doing well. And we can have, it's ruined, it's neglected, it's very old, it's long incurred, it's corrupt, neglected, consumed itself, collapsed, and dilapsum is just roughly the same. So we have, and this one is rather nice, intercaderat means it is dead, right? The road is dead, which I think is a great use of like, sort of the destruction. Now, this is just to give you an idea of the first road they built was in 312 BCE, and they built it to the place called Capua. That's about 100 Roman miles. Now you notice that extremely straight thing. Now 312 BCE is roughly the time of Pythagoras. It's exactly the same time as Pythagoras. How do you survey a straight road in the Roman world? Well, I think today almost nobody knows. We think it is to do with offsets or something like that, which we probably need an engineer to tell us how to do it properly. There are multiple theories. But the thing which they do, that straight line, where it says Aricia, that's up at the top of the volcanic region. So they actually have a fairly straight road which goes straight up the hill. And it's orientated from, in Rome, there's a temple on the Aventine Hill, and it's orientated in a straight line right down to Anxur or Terracina. And then, as you can see, it no longer follows a straight course. It actually mostly follows the coast. It skirts around various marshes. But in that first bit, that's straight through the Pontine marshes, which were drained by Mussolini. And this came after that area had been inhabited. The road originally went down to Brindisi, where you'd get your boat over to Greece. Then you took the Via Egnatia, which takes you to modern Istanbul or then Constantinople. So that roadway. This bit was added later in about 114 AD. But having made this 312 BCE road, we think then what happened next? Nothing happened next. The next long distance road they built was almost 100 years later. So it's a slow process. We associate Romans with these efficient people who go conquer everywhere, and they have roads, they have aqueducts, they have all that stuff, which some of you have probably seen Monty Python's Life of Brian, which all of those things. But it's actually slow, and it's incredibly slow. And when they build this, they bankrupt the treasury. They build They introduced coinage, especially to pay the people who are building the road. The first time they start making their own coins rather than borrowing people's coins. So this causes massive change in thinking of a linear thing which is entirely owned by the state, paid for by the state. And this is what, in some ways, creates a different world of thinking. The different world of thinking, this is 312 BCE, next one's 220 BCE, then through 180s, 160s, they're building roads everywhere. And this is what changes their mentality. So originally a mentality was, we've got our city up here, we actually don't particularly want to get beyond that. Roman world, we've got a city here, we'll build a road here, this is a colony of our citizens. This is another colony of our citizens. This is another colony of our citizens. This is another one, another one. These are people we think are degenerate. And we gradually have more and more, they sort of expand settlements of citizens along the roads. And this changes the mentality of how you think about geography completely. By 27 BCE, there's a person who, this arch was set up to the Emperor Augustus, where he said, the Via Flaminia and the other famous roads of Italy. So we went for 312 BCE, first road, to this point where Italy has famous roads. And Augustus puts on his coins that he repaves the roads. And we have this impossible bit of engineering of a bridge with a triumphal arch with a statue of an elephant on it. And eventually that sort of moves apart and we get a much more rational idea of two arches representing the ends of two roads, of the roads. The road is a finite thing. The Via Flaminia is from Rome to Rimini. That is the length of the road. So arches at both ends. Yeah, sure. And this gives us a sort of sense of the power and the importance of roads. And we also have the connecting of rivers. So the connecting of the River Po in northern Italy to the Danube is so integrating river and road transport. And we had a look at this at lunchtime. This is a map of the Roman world, whole Roman world, showing the roads, the rivers, the mountains, and the sea. Milestones are incredibly important because you know where you are on the road. You know how far somewhere it will be. If you head to Capua, it's going to be 100 miles. And as you pass each milestone, you know that you're getting closer. Now, if you say, I'm going to Capua, it will take me 3 days. I will receive your letter when I arrive. So at that point, you can actually have communication as you move. The other thing which, if we're thinking about mobility, the thing which Andres grew up in Chile, his teeth have, because your teeth form when you're a child, he has the teeth of Chile. If we had his skeleton, we could look at his bones and we could say, well, he's living in Australia for sure. He's got the chemistry of Australia through his bones regeneration, but his teeth are from Chile. We could identify him as from Chile. Now, the thing which has come up, this is called stable isotope analysis. It was big in the 2010s. People have stopped doing it as much. But one of the things we started to find was this figure of 30% of the population of York were for somewhere else. This particular woman was very controversial in the right-wing Murdoch press in the UK because she was from North Africa, she was a migrant, and the outrage of the press was there were migrants before there was English. So English came after the Roman period. So this idea of 30% population moving around seems to be a norm in the Roman world. They also make cities. So if you make London, nobody was living there before, migration has to be normalized. So one of the things to leave you with is the thought that did Rome program Europe? Did this setting up of this transport system? There's at least 2 German guys who keep writing papers because they cite my work, so I know about this, in saying that this area of Germany is very prosperous today because the Romans created that prosperity 2,000 years before by creating a transport system. Now, most archaeologists at this point think, we just don't believe this stuff. But people are thinking about that. And if you are starting to look at the transport pattern here, that's the transport pattern of Italy today. If you start looking at Britain, well, most of it's centered on London. That's the transport pattern of Britain. If you can pick out Paris there, and the transport pattern, partly due to Napoleon as well, is centered on Paris. And you can, I mean, obviously Spain is in, where's Madrid? I never know where Madrid is, sort of here. But again, you've got this part down here, Barcelona, and we actually have a not dissimilar transport pattern. And we have this part of Africa also has a density of roads as well, which is unlike this part of Africa. So I'm leaving you with that thought. You might think that's true, or might not think that's true. And if you have questions to ask, there are questions to ask, or we can look at my map.
I'm sure there are questions.
There was a picture from Pompeii that seems to have like a pedestrian strip or something. Would that?
Maybe. Oh.
So on the, I mean, I can see
The pavement?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are pavements.
That's where houses or shops or what?
Shops.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so what's that raised? I don't know, probably it's 1 meter or 2 meter width.
This thing?
No, that's is it for pedestrians? So
This is for
they tend to segregate.
this is for pedestrians, partly because you can just see here there are 3 stones to cross the road, raised up, because the Pompeii streets, and it's true today, when it rains, the water is deep in the street. The other thing that so the depth of water will come up to here. So to keep your feet out of the wet, they put these stones, which are incredibly inconvenient to traffic, particularly people who ride horses, say there's no way a horse will go through that. The other thing which they do is they insert water fountain obstacles. When they get an aqueduct, they go, where should we put the water fountains? We need to put it in public space. What's the public space? The road. So at this point, so you actually impede two-way traffic in the street. So there's lots of impediments in Pompeii, but pavements are, you can find them everywhere. Or sidewalks. So.
I have a question that might be a bit of chicken and egg, but in this map that you showed from the roads in the Roman Empire, so were the streets, this one for example,
yeah,
were most of these roads designed because they want to connect to points, or were already transit of people and animals?
Yeah.
And they're creating a path that they just put.
Mm-hmm. So this is the impossible, right? Because it's impossible to know, and it's always good to have impossible to knows. So one of the things the Romans do when they take over this part of Italy, this part of modern Turkey, there are roads there, but they put their own milestones in and say, we made the roads better. So they're probably using existing transport routes largely. But in some cases, like this bit of the Via Appia, it's completely new. So they can follow traditional routeways, or they can create a new routeway next to an old one. So, and they do a little thing down here to make things quicker by making a new road. So rather than going along circuitous route, they go, we want to get to the Bay of Naples from the Via Appia, we'll build a new road in 80 AD. So there's adding to, and there's also all of these places were originally connected in some way. The Roman roads in the local area of Rome go back to the 5th century. to the law of the 12 tables, where they say a straight road should be 8 feet wide, a curve on the curves, it should be 12 feet wide. So just that difficulty of turning is reflected there. Yes.
How much a road increases the speed of an average trip? They were very slow without road, but the road makes a difference.
How much data do we have? Not a lot, right? So if I summon you to court in the Roman world, in Roman law, I have to give you the time for each day, so each 20 kilometers is 1 day, right? 20 miles, sorry, so it would be 30 kilometers. So 30 kilometers is not that far to travel each day. People do pilgrimages from Britain to Rome, and there's the Compostela pilgrimage. What happens to your body when you walk 30 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 30 kilometers is very bad things happen to your feet. Your toenails normally fall off. But that gives you a slow pace. So that gives us a pace which would be wherever, were there roads, were there not roads. If you have messengers, so people who are changing animals, because the Romans have sort of changed places for the state to use where they can swap animals over and stay the night there, because that's how the Roman state runs itself, then you can have much faster journeys. So a messenger could be going 50, 60 miles a day, even 100 miles a day is possible. So you can speed things up. But the thing which for an important person is to go slowly, because then you can send your letters ahead of you and you get a reply. So moving quickly causes the news to not move. News is moving faster than a lot of the government is moving. Hopefully that helps. Yes.
Got a number of questions. I usually do, but I'll ask you one that I think everyone in this room would really appreciate. Firstly, you started off talking about how roads were initially measured in terms of the total distance of a network, as we understand it. So I was told a long time ago that a lot of the roads in Sydney in particular were built using parts that First Nations people had using. What is, I guess, the academic evidence to support that kind of claim?
So the kind of claim here, I think it comes down to the critique of where the roads were in the middle 19th century. There's a guy called, oh God, what's his name? It's called Captain Martindale. And you can go to the State Library and he writes 4 reports on the roads of New South Wales. And he gets more and more frustrated by them because they're not in the right place to go over the Blue Mountains. It's a bad road. Why would you put the road there? So the non-knowledge of why would you put the road there is it's basically a walking track rather than something which you would have a cart go up, because getting over the Blue Mountains is incredibly difficult. I mean, it's a very awkward thing. So in a similar way that I think a lot of the Roman road is actually making something a state thing. So you've got all these bits which you join together and you call it the Via Flaminia. So from Rome to Rimini, goes over the Apennines, not really a natural route in any way. Have a tunnel, stuff like that. Exciting for engineers. But ultimately, by calling it one thing, you are making it different. And you're making it different because you start improving it. You make sure the gradients aren't nonsense, and you make it easier for travel, rather than a lot of the early roads in the 19th century seem to be not really suitable for travel.
A couple of very interesting questions online by Matt Faber. So the first one is whether the bankruptcy of Roman treasury
Mhm.
can be seen as an example of delivering infrastructure at this scale. It's a way of converting public collective wealth into private wealth.
Yeah.
And the second one is based on the experience of my father, the person asking, is whether the Romans might have perfected the concept of 50 minutes city, 50 minutes neighborhood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but
I've heard of it.
it's basically the idea that we should be
Yeah.
built.
Okay, so let's deal with the second one first because that's easier. So Pompeii as a city, right? People have been to Pompeii, maybe? Anyone been to Pompeii? Yes, a few people. Right, to walk across Pompeii takes me, right? I am much taller than an ancient person. An ancient person is only 1.64 m if they're male, 1.56 m if they're female. For me to walk across Pompeii takes a maximum of 20 minutes, normally 15 minutes. So you have a 15-minute city, basically, of roughly, it might be 20,000 people, could be 30, could be 12, we don't know. But that gives us and the area is about, is 66 hectares. So that gives us an idea of that city. Now, ancient Rome is not a 50-minute city. Ancient Rome is the first, it has 1 million people, has about 7.2 km squared, has lots of gardens, but we have the first long urban walks in Rome. So Martial, one of the poets, he talks about going to see his patron, the guy who gives him money. And he goes to his house, it's a long walk, he gets there and he's out. And it has to go all the way back. And he speculates on the way back, was he really out or not? So Rome is the opposite to a 50-minute city. It's definitely, it's a metropolis, it's stuff which doesn't make sense. You're disconnected from the countryside. Whereas the small towns and most cities in the Roman world have less than 50,000 people in there. So they are all well below a 50-minute city. Now, the bankrupting of the treasury, it's like, do we know? And the answer is we don't know. The person who sets this up is accused of wanting to become some sort of king because he's very popular, because there's lots of work, there's lots of money. You could actually say, well, does it matter? So you have a removal of money into private hands in the sense of the citizens all are working for money, making this road, which is an incredible feat of engineering. But does it cause it to be privatized? Probably not, because the road is a state thing. The roads are one of the few things. Normally tax collection, you actually have who's going to give us the best bid to go and collect the taxes for us. Roman state doesn't collect tax, you go and get someone else to do it. You get someone to do it in Sicily, a province, and they give you the money, you decide how much money they give you, and they then go and extort people ruthlessly. But that is sort of public-private partnership in the Roman state. So a lot of things are just not done by the state. The state has limited apparatus. Rome doesn't even have a police force.
It's 5 p.m.